I woke up to the hollow thrum of rain on the gutters, a sound that always made the house feel more isolated. It was just before 7 a.m., my usual time to stare at the ceiling and wonder if today would be any different from the last. Dad and Mom had left 2 days ago for an out-of-state work trip, so it was me, my brother Kyle, and my sister Millie in this big old house we'd grown up in. I was supposed to be the responsible adult, being the oldest at 26, but that job title never felt right. Not when I'd spent the better part of the past few years holed up in the attic, studying dusty lore books and chasing down conspiracy theories about ghosts and other entities. I threw my legs over the side of the bed. Outside, the sky was a dreary gray, the driveway glistening with standing puddles. Something about that color, the color of static on an old TV, had always unnerved me. Truth be told, I'd done a poor job of being big brother lately, and I felt the usual wave of guilt. Kyle and Millie each had classes to worry about. But with Mom and Dad out of town, they relied on me for rides, groceries, that sort of thing. Lately, though, all I'd done was bury my nose in obscure websites and secondhand books about urban legends. I yawned, rubbed the last traces of sleep from my eyes, and headed out into the hallway. Our house was old, full of creaking floorboards and corners that never got enough sunlight. Mom always said we needed better overhead lighting, but Dad insisted we keep the old fixtures for character. At the top of the staircase, I heard Kyle rummaging in the kitchen. Millie was probably still in bed. I mentally added grocery shopping to my day's to-do list right beside figure out who's going to pick up Kyle from practice. On my way down, I paused by the window on the landing. I'd seen something flicker in the corner of my eye, just a reflection, maybe. I leaned forward, pressing my palm to the glass. The yard was empty, the sky still that static gray. The reflection in the pane caught my own face, tired, gaunt, like I hadn't slept well in months. Then a sudden crackle. It sounded like faint static, but I realized after a moment it might just have been the old wiring in the wall behind me. Shaking my head, I continued down. "You're letting your obsessions get to you," I muttered to myself, half laughing at my paranoia. Kyle was standing at the fridge in his jeans and a worn t-shirt from our high school's basketball team. He turned when he heard me. "Please tell me you're picking me up from practice today," he said, eyebrows knitted. "Right," I said, opening the cabinet for coffee. "I can do that. You forgot last time," I winced. 2 weeks ago, I'd gotten so engrossed in researching local hauntings that I left Kyle waiting at the gym for an hour. "It won't happen again," I promised. He gave a sarcastic nod, then turned to rummage for an energy drink. "Well, if you don't show, I'll just hitch a ride with Connor." I exhaled, poured coffee, and tried to push aside the pang of guilt. "Sounds good," I said softly. Millie appeared shortly after, wearing one of those oversized hoodies she was practically living in. Her eyes were half-lidded with sleep. "Any word from Mom and Dad?" she asked. I shook my head. "They texted me last night. They'll be back next Tuesday." She grunted a greeting, grabbed a slice of leftover pizza from the fridge, and then joined Kyle in the silent rummaging for breakfast. Our daily routine, mundane as ever, except for that slight, unspoken tension that had been coiling in the air since our parents left. I chalked it up to stress, plus the fact that I never shut up about the paranormal. I had no idea how wrong I was. Around 10 a.m., after dropping Millie off for her morning class and Kyle off at the high school, I returned to an empty, quiet house. I booted up my laptop in the living room, determined to do something productive, like maybe check job listings, or get a sense of the real world that existed outside my esoteric interests. But habit took over, and before I knew it, I was scanning my usual paranormal forum. That day, the chatter was intense. People hearing strange tapping at windows across the country, weird emergency alerts about shutting off TVs, reports of seeing glimpses of pale humanoids in black screens. In a chat thread, someone posted a story about waking up to an incessant tap-tap-tap on their window, only to find no one there. My heart pounded with an odd mix of fear and excitement. Then, as if on cue, tap-tap-tap. The sound came from the living room window behind me. 3 precise knocks, just like the forum described. Slowly, I turned in my seat. The blinds were half drawn, so I could only see a slice of the yard. Grass, the trunk of the oak tree by our driveway, the glint of wet sidewalks. No silhouette, and no shape indicating someone standing out there. Tap, tap, tap. My stomach lurched. I stood up, crossing the carpet in hesitant steps, my socks nearly silent against the floor. The knocks came again, so persistent yet not frantic. I mustered the nerve to tug the blinds aside, peering outside. There was nothing, just an empty front yard, soggy with rain. The street was deserted. Yet the tapping continued, as if the glass itself was producing the sound. Tap, tap, tap. It was closer now. I yanked the blinds shut fully. The tapping stopped. Silence descended, thick and suffocating. For a moment, I just stood there, heart thrumming in my ears, telling myself it had to be a branch or some trick of the wind. But there was no branch in range of that window. Calm down, I muttered under my breath, returning to the couch. I grabbed my laptop, half expecting it to blink off with an eerie message. But everything looked normal. The feeling of being watched lingered, though, making my skin crawl. I decided to distract myself by going upstairs, rummaging through my old reference books. Maybe it was time to compile my notes on glass specters, or reflection entities, that certain folk legends described. People in the forum had posted about them, calling them skins, mirrors, or other ominous names. I had no clue how relevant that research would soon become. My bedroom doubles as a mini-library of all things creepy and arcane. Shelves sag under the weight of battered paperbacks, spiral-bound manuscripts, half of them focusing on lesser-known paranormal phenomena. I found one old binder labeled Reflective Surfaces and Doorway Theories. I flipped through it, scanning pages I'd printed years ago about haunted mirrors, televisions that acted as portals, and water surfaces rumored to reflect unseen worlds. I spent hours lost in those pages, occasionally glancing up at my dusty TV set in the corner, feeling strangely uneasy. Usually, I kept the TV unplugged. I hardly ever watched anything on it. My siblings teased me for refusing to get rid of it, saying it was ancient. But I couldn't part with the possibility it might serve me in some future investigation. Time slipped away. I realized with a start that I needed to pick up Kyle from practice. Gathering my stuff, I hurried downstairs, ignoring the flutter of nerves that told me something was off in the house. Outside, the wind had picked up again. Dark clouds massed overhead. I got in my car and turned on the radio, only to hear static. I tried scanning through channels, still static. Must have been the weather messing with reception. As I backed out, I glanced up at my bedroom window. It's a second-story window with a small overhang. My heart nearly seized. For a split second, I swore I saw a pale face in the glass. But then it was gone, probably just a reflection of the sky, I told myself, chanting the usual litany of reasons not to panic. But the memory of the tap 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 haunted me. I picked up Kyle and swung by to get Millie, who'd stayed late at a friend's place to study. The entire time, the roads felt abnormally deserted, like everyone had decided to stay indoors. By the time we got back, it was near dusk, a bruised purple sky swirling with storm clouds. We settled in for dinner, leftover pasta this time. Kyle devoured his plate in silence, while Millie picked at hers. I tried to lighten the mood, asking about her classes, but she was terse. Something felt off in the air, an unspoken weight. Midway through dinner, I heard it again. Tap, 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 from the living room window. I nearly choked on my food. Millie frowned. Did you hear that? Probably the wind, Kyle said, but he didn't sound so sure. I wasn't about to spook them with the story of my earlier experience, so I clamped my mouth shut and forced the last of my pasta down. Afterward, I pretended to watch some YouTube videos on my laptop in the living room, while Kyle retreated to his room to play guitar, and Millie went upstairs to do some reading. The house grew eerily quiet except for Kyle's distant strumming. Then the knock started again. Tap, tap, tap. I nearly jumped out of my skin. This time, they were more insistent, louder. My gaze whipped to the window, blinds partially drawn. A flicker of movement in the gap, like a tall silhouette shifting just out of sight. My stomach flipped. Hesitantly, I moved closer. "Who's there?" I called, feeling foolish. But again, no answer. I raised my voice. "If this is some prank, it's not funny." The tapping resumed, a slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I pulled the blinds aside. No one stood there, just the dark yard. But in the reflection of the living room lamp on the window, for an instant, I thought I saw a shape behind me in the room. A tall, spindly figure. I spun around, nothing. My heart hammered. I inhaled shakily, stepping away from the window. The entire living room felt colder, as if a draft had seeped in. Calm down, I told myself, stumbling back to the couch. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket, making me yelp. I fished it out, an unfamiliar number. A text flashed across the screen. Emergency alert. Turn off all televisions. Remain indoors. Further instructions to follow. I stared at it, blood pounding in my ears. This had to be a hoax, but it carried the same formatting as a typical government phone alert. Turn off all televisions. That was oddly specific and weirdly aligned with the rumors I'd been reading online. Outside, thunder growled. My mind swam with half-baked theories. Something was definitely wrong. I shut the living room curtains firmly and headed upstairs to tell Kyle and Millie about the strange text. Kyle had his guitar propped against the bed, messing with an amp that hissed with mild feedback. Millie was in her room, headphones on, listening to a lecture. I knocked on her door, noticing something odd on the threshold. A clump of hair, dark, wet-looking strands, jammed into the crack at the base of the door as if it had been pulled out in a fistful and shoved there. I grimaced, my stomach twisting. "Millie," I said, opening the door carefully. She pulled off her headphones. "What is up? Did you, drop some hair by the door or something?" She frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" I pointed to the wad of hair, long, matted. It resembled her hair color, but something about it made my skin crawl. She peered down, then recoiled. "That's not mine." We both stood there a moment, unsettled. I grabbed a tissue from her nightstand and gingerly picked it up. The hair was damp, smelled faintly sour, like algae or mold. "This is beyond disgusting," I muttered. "How did it even get here?" Millie wrapped her arms around herself. "Maybe it was on someone's shoe." She didn't sound convinced. I tossed the hair in the bathroom trash, fighting a wave of nausea. I considered telling her about the tapping at the window and the odd phone alert, but decided to break it gently. "Look, I got this weird text telling us to turn off any TVs. Something's going on." She blinked, worry creeping into her eyes. "That's creepy." "I know," I said softly. "Just keep your phone near. Let me know if anything weird happens." She nodded, biting her lip. There was a tension in her posture, like she wanted to ask more but couldn't find the words. Down the hall, Kyle's door stood open. I poked my head in and told him the same thing. He raised an eyebrow at the mention of the turn off all televisions alert. "Weird, but we hardly use the TV anyway, so no biggie." "It's probably nothing," I lied. "Just letting you know." By nightfall, a storm raged outside. Lightning flashed intermittently, and the wind howled. The house creaked and groaned in the downpour. We ate a late dinner in the kitchen, canned soup, all we could manage. The tense atmosphere hung around us like a damp blanket. Around 9:00 p.m., Millie retreated upstairs, complaining of a headache. Kyle stayed in his room, texting with friends. I lingered in the living room, reading old accounts of knocking phantoms and reflection creatures. Then the power flickered, plunging me into darkness for a split second before the lights sputtered back on. My heart pounded. "Great," I muttered, half expecting the power to fail completely. Lightning cracked outside, illuminating the yard for an instant. And in that flare, I could have sworn I saw a tall, skinny figure just beyond the front fence, near the trash bin. I jumped up, pressing my face to the window. Another flash of lightning, and nothing. A heavy thud came from upstairs. I heard Millie shout my name in a frantic voice. I bounded up the steps 2 at a time. She was standing in the hallway, eyes wide. "There's someone in my room," she gasped. I rushed in, flipping the light switch. Her room was empty except for the usual piles of clothes, her desk, and the unmade bed. "No one's here," I said, breathless. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. I heard scratching at my window. Then a silhouette. I only saw it for a second. The wind howled, rattling her window. I peered out into the storm-lashed darkness, the glass streaked with rain. No figure, no shape, just that same feeling of being watched. Suddenly, Millie let out a strangled gasp. She pointed at the floor near her bed. Something half hidden beneath the dust ruffle. I crouched, heart hammering, and pulled it out. A small wax figurine, roughly shaped like a human, but melted on one side, drooping as if exposed to heat. It fit in my palm, sticky to the touch. The color was a murky off-white, almost translucent. We stared at it in horror. "What the hell is this?" I whispered. Millie shook her head, eyes brimming with tears. "I didn't put that there." The shape was unnervingly elongated, like the limbs had been stretched. "I've read about effigies in some stories," I said quietly. "Wax figures that represent a person. Sometimes they're used as a conduit for something malignant." She clutched her arms. "Throw it out, please." I nodded, grabbing a tissue from her desk, wrapping the wax figure so I wouldn't touch it directly. The moment I picked it up, a wave of dizziness passed over me. I steadied myself against the bedpost, teeth chattering. I'm okay," I lied, hurrying to the bathroom and dropping the figure in the trash can. Then I rummaged under the sink, found a plastic bag, scooped it into the bag, and sealed it tight. The faintest whiff of sulfur assaulted my nose. When I returned to Millie's room, she was pacing by the door, arms hugging herself. "What is going on?" she whispered. "We'll figure it out," I said, though my own voice shook. "Let's check on Kyle." We found Kyle in his room, phone in hand, looking irritated. "You guys okay?" he asked. I heard shouting. "Millie saw something," I said, keeping my tone steady. "And we found a weird wax figure under her bed." He frowned. "You sure you're not letting your ghost nonsense freak you out?" Millie glared at him. "Look for yourself if you don't believe me." I brandished the plastic bag with the wax shape. Kyle's face paled. He reached out, gently pressing on the figure through the plastic. It squished slightly, half melted. "That's messed up," he said, swallowing. Then his phone lit up with a new message, and he looked down. I saw the color drain from his cheeks. "What is it?" I asked. He hesitated, then turned the screen toward us. "Another emergency alert. Do not engage with any figures you see outside. Remain indoors. Avoid screen reflections. Stay tuned for further updates." Millie let out a shaky breath. "Avoid screen reflections. What does that mean?" "I've read rumors about some being that uses reflections," I murmured, mind spinning. "Mirrors, TVs, phone screens. Could be nonsense, but maybe not." Kyle rubbed his temples. "I can't believe this is real life." The overhead light flickered again, momentarily drenching the room in shadow. The thunder rolled, louder this time. I stared at Kyle's dark computer monitor on his desk, suddenly hyper-aware that it, too, was a reflective surface. My reflection caught my eye. I looked tense, eyes wide, shoulders hunched. The reflection shifted, distorting for a split second. A trick of the flickering light, I told myself. I turned to them. "We should probably cover the TVs and monitors, just to be safe." Millie didn't argue, and Kyle, though still skeptical, shrugged in agreement. We spent the next half hour rummaging for towels, blankets, anything to drape over screens or reflective surfaces. Millie insisted on covering the bathroom mirror, too. She said she kept getting a weird feeling every time she walked by it. It felt almost comical, like we were preparing for some kind of bizarre apocalypse. But the tension in the house was real, thick as the humidity from the storm. Once we'd covered every potential reflection, we gathered in the living room. The lights kept flickering, so we lit a few candles to keep from being plunged into total darkness. The last thing I wanted was to see my reflection in a dark TV screen unexpectedly. The rain pounded overhead, and wind rattled the windows. Occasionally, I heard that dreaded tap-tap-tap at the glass, but I refused to look. "Should we call the cops?" Kyle asked, picking at a loose thread on his jeans. Millie shook her head. "What would we even say?" "That the house is haunted by tapping noises and weird alerts. They'd think we're insane." She wasn't wrong. Besides, I suspected we weren't the only ones getting these alerts. Something bigger was happening. I tried to check my phone for online news, but the data connection was spotty. A message popped up, "Network unstable. Please try again later." Frustrated, I set my phone aside. Let's just ride this out. I didn't sound confident, though. Right then, a sudden thump echoed from the entryway. We all jumped. Candles flickered. I hurried to the hallway, heart hammering. The front door was locked, deadbolt in place, but the porch light outside was flickering madly. Something was lodged under the door, like the door frame wouldn't shut fully. I bent down and saw, to my horror, another wad of black, tangled hair stuck in the space. It looked wet, glistening with something thicker than water. Kyle cursed under his breath as he leaned closer. "That's the second time we've seen this hair. It's a warning," Millie whispered, face pale. "Or maybe a sign." Carefully, using a piece of newspaper, I pulled the hair free. It came loose with a sickening squelch. Immediately, a waft of decay hit me, like swamp water. I grimaced, tossing the clump onto the newspaper. Footsteps sounded on the porch, slow, deliberate. I motioned for them to be silent, heart racing. For a moment, we listened. Another tap, 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 this time on the door itself. We said nothing. Eventually, the footsteps receded. In the flickering light, we exchanged shaky glances. "We have to do something," Kyle said. "We can't just sit here." But none of us had a better plan. Midnight found us huddled in the living room, each of us taking a couch or chair. Thunder boomed intermittently, rattling the windows. I was flipping through one of my books, desperate for any mention of wax figures, clumps of hair, tapping at windows. Millie hovered beside me, peering at the diagrams. Kyle paced by the curtained window, occasionally peeking out. A little after midnight, my phone buzzed again. Another alert, emergency alert, unidentified entities detected. Do not look outside. Do not turn on televisions. The three of us stared at the screen. "This is insane," Kyle muttered. My stomach fluttered with genuine fear. Entities, a word that made my paranormal obsession flare, but not with excitement this time. Suddenly, Kyle's phone chimed too. He glanced at it, brow furrowing. "It's a text from Dad." Millie and I rushed over, hearts leaping with hope. Maybe Dad's okay. Maybe he knows something. Kyle opened the text, and his expression shifted to confusion, then horror. It just says, "Let me in." I'm right outside. My blood ran cold. Mom and Dad were supposed to be on a work trip hundreds of miles away. Millie shook her head. "That can't be Dad." Kyle's phone pinged again. "I'm cold. Please let me in." A wave of primal terror coursed through me. Something was mimicking Dad's phone, or had hijacked his contact. Millie swallowed. "Don't respond to it." But Kyle's face wavered with indecision. What if they came back early? What if Dad's phone is messing up? "Think logically," I said, voice shaking. "He would have called all of us, not just you. He'd say more than that. And he's traveling with Mom. He wouldn't just show up here alone in the middle of the night." Kyle's phone buzzed again, this time a photo. It showed our driveway, dark and slick with rain. No visible figure, just the front yard. But the angle was from outside the living room window, a vantage point that proved whoever sent it was physically there, or wanted us to think so. Millie stifled a whimper. "We can't open the door." Kyle clenched his jaw, stepping away from us. I know, I'm not stupid. But the tension in his eyes betrayed a swirl of emotions, fear, confusion, maybe a flicker of misguided hope. We retreated to the center of the room, away from the windows. I tried to show them the pages in my old binder about allures, entities that replicate voices of loved ones to gain access. But that did little to calm anyone. The night wore on, and exhaustion dragged at us. At some point, Kyle quietly slipped out of the living room. I assumed he needed the bathroom. Millie dozed off in an armchair, hugging a throw pillow. Minutes or hours passed in that haze of candlelight and shadows. Then I heard the front door creak. My heart lurched. "Kyle," I called, jolting upright. I got no answer, so I scrambled toward the foyer, nearly tripping over a footstool. The door was partially open, letting in a gust of wet air. Beyond the threshold, the yard lay in darkness. "Kyle," I shouted, peering outside. Rain spattered the porch. A single, pale figure stood at the end of the driveway. It was tall, impossibly lanky. My throat closed in terror as lightning flashed, illuminating that twisted silhouette. Then it vanished, dissolving into the shadows. I stepped onto the porch barefoot, ignoring the ice-cold water soaking my socks. "Kyle," I yelled again, scanning the yard. No sign of him. My heart thundered, panic tightening my chest. Had he gone out there, thinking Dad was waiting? "Millie," I called, rushing back in. She stumbled in, eyes wide. "Kyle's gone. He must have left the house." Her face went paper-white. We grabbed flashlights, my mind in overdrive. "Check the backyard, I'll check the driveway." She nodded, tears brimming, and we split up. Outside, the rain hammered me relentlessly, chilling me to the bone. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the slick pavement. "Kyle," I shouted, my voice nearly swallowed by the storm. Footsteps splashed behind me. I whirled around, heart pounding. No one was there, but I had the distinct sensation of being watched. I shone the flashlight around, catching glimpses of the curb, the empty street, the neighbors' dark houses. All normal, except that no lights shone anywhere. It was as if the entire block had lost power. A flicker of motion made me whip the beam toward our trash bins. For half a second I saw a shape, a tall, pale figure hunched behind them, arms too long, fingers splayed against the wet bin surface. When the light hit it, the creature jerked back with a bone-snapping motion, then disappeared behind the fence. I forced myself not to scream. Instead, I pressed on, scanning for Kyle. My voice cracked as I yelled his name. Then I heard a small whimper, coming from the side yard near the fence gate. I rushed over, shining the light frantically. The beam landed on Kyle crouched against the side of the house, breathing in ragged gasps. He was soaked, hair plastered to his head. Relief flooded me. "Kyle, what are you doing out here?" He shook his head, eyes wide with terror. I thought Dad was out here. I saw someone." I grabbed his arm, helping him up. "Come on, we have to get inside." But the moment I tried to guide him, he resisted, looking over his shoulder. It whispered to me, said it was Dad, told me to come closer. "Kyle, that wasn't Dad," I said firmly, my heart aching for him. He swallowed hard, letting me pull him toward the front door. We hurried onto the porch, adrenaline spiking. The door was still ajar. Inside, Millie waited, eyes red-rimmed. She exhaled in relief at the sight of Kyle. We stumbled into the foyer, slamming the door behind us, double-locking it. Outside, a deep rumbling echoed through the night. Kyle sagged against the wall, water dripping from his clothes onto the floor. Millie hovered, not sure if she should hug him or scold him. "Don't ever do that again," she whispered, voice trembling. "I'm sorry," he managed. They used Dad's voice. Tears threatened to spill from Millie's eyes, but she blinked them back. "We're safe now. We're all here," but safe was a relative term. We huddled back in the living room. I found fresh clothes for Kyle, and we gave him a towel. Millie lit more candles. The power was definitely out for the entire block now, leaving us in an oppressive hush, punctuated by thunder and rain. My phone battery dipped below 20%, so I rationed how often I checked it. Kyle's phone was at 30%, and Millie's was almost dead. Another wave of helplessness crushed me. We whispered about what to do next. If this storm passes by morning, maybe we can drive somewhere safer. Millie suggested. Kyle nodded, eyes distant. But where do we go? We have no idea how widespread this is. In my research, I'd read countless accounts of supernatural events that thrived on fear and isolation. This felt all too similar, like an orchestrated terror meant to break us. Let's see if we can last the night, I said, my voice hollow. Lightning illuminated the living room window, and I instinctively glanced at the curtain. A silhouette pressed against it from outside, thin arms raising slowly, leaving a faint imprint on the fabric. My pulse thundered. Kyle, Millie, don't look, I hissed, dropping my gaze. The silhouette slid across the curtain, drifting away. We heard tap, tap, tap again, but this time on the glass of the window. Millie squeezed her eyes shut. This can't be real. I wanted to reassure her, but I was too busy trying not to shake. Minutes passed like hours. Eventually, the tapping faded. In its place, a low static buzz seemed to emanate from nowhere. It filled the corners of the room, whispery, half-formed. Kyle's phone lit up with a call. The caller ID read, Dad. My breath hitched as he stared at the screen, face taut with fear and longing. Don't answer, Millie said firmly. We let it ring, the static in the background intensifying, as though furious we didn't pick up. Then it stopped, leaving us in dreadful silence. Close to 2:00 a.m., fatigue weighed on us. Millie dozed off on the couch, arms folded, leaning against a throw pillow. Kyle slumped in an armchair, eyes half-lidded. I was the only one who remained fully awake, mind too wired to rest. I needed to do something, so I quietly left them in the living room and ventured into the kitchen. My plan was to find flashlights, maybe some protein bars or energy drinks to keep us going. As I rummaged in a drawer, I heard a faint creak from the hallway. The hallway was dark, but a candle flickered near the living room entrance. In that unsteady light, I saw a pale hand, thin, almost skeletal, slide around the corner at floor level, as if something crawled on all fours. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. The hand withdrew, accompanied by a soft scraping sound, like nails on wood. A swirl of static hissed in my ears, disorienting me. I took a slow step forward, my bare feet silent on the tile. The corner was just a few feet away. Could it be Kyle or Millie, half asleep, messing with me? But no, they were both in the living room. I peered around the corner. Darkness, broken only by a flicker of candlelight at the far end. Nothing scuttled across the floor. I heard only the steady patter of rain outside. I exhaled shakily, turning back to the kitchen. Then I froze. Something was behind me. A reflection in the window above the sink, my own face. And then, behind me, was a tall, skinny, pale figure. My blood turned to ice. Slowly I pivoted, dread coiling in my gut. Nothing stood there, but I felt a presence, cold and electric, looming just behind my left shoulder. My peripheral vision caught the faintest distortion in the air, a patch of swirling grayish light. Then it winked out, leaving me alone. I stumbled back, grabbing the edge of the counter to steady myself. My breath came in ragged bursts. "Oh God," I whispered. Some part of me wanted to run to my siblings, but I needed to keep it together. In a daze, I grabbed the flashlights, plus a couple of canned drinks. Then I hurried back to the living room, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. The night crept on. Every passing minute felt like a countdown to something worse. When Kyle roused from a brief doze, I pulled him aside, away from Millie, who slept fitfully. "We might need to fight back," I whispered. He rubbed his eyes, confused. "We don't even know what they are." I showed him some notes from my binder, sightings of faceless watchers that appear in screens, how certain frequencies might disrupt them, mostly unverified lore. We can't just sit here waiting to be picked off. According to these stories, sometimes the creatures rely on reflective gateways. They lure you into looking at them, making you vulnerable. Kyle looked skeptical, but fear overshadowed his doubt. So what do you suggest? I swallowed. We were told not to turn on the TV. But I might need to. If I can see them in the reflection, maybe I can learn something. Some people online say they used a TV as a sort of trap or barrier. I'm not sure if it'll work, but it might be our only shot. He tensed. That sounds insane and dangerous. It is, I admitted. But if I do it carefully, maybe we can glean a weakness. We both knew it was a wild gamble. But we had no other leads. At around 3:00 a.m., while Millie slept, Kyle and I snuck upstairs to my room where the old TV sat. It was a bulky CRT model, ancient enough that you had to physically change channels on the side. We set up a large blanket behind us, covering the doorway so Millie wouldn't see the glow. We didn't want her panicking. My hands trembled as I plugged the TV in, ignoring every instinct that screamed this is a terrible idea. Keep your eyes on the floor unless I say otherwise, I warned Kyle. I was afraid that if these creatures thrived on direct eye contact via reflections, it might end badly for him. He nodded, swallowing hard. I flipped the power switch. The TV hummed, the screen lighting up with static. The house had no cable signal, so it just displayed that black and white fuzz. A cold sweat broke out on my brow. Okay, I whispered. Show me something. For a few seconds, it remained normal static. Then, unbelievably, the white noise parted, revealing an image of a darkened hallway, one that looked like our own hallway downstairs. Kyle stifled a gasp, keeping his gaze down. Is it showing the hallway? Yeah, I said, voice shaking. It's our house. On the screen, I saw the living room door, the bottom edges of the windows. The camera angle was low, as if something crouched on the floor. A gaunt, pale hand slid into view, the same bony shape I'd glimpsed earlier. The hand pressed against the door frame. Then the screen flickered, and for an instant, I caught a glimpse of its face, featureless, except for two sunken pits where eyes should be. It stared directly into the camera, or so it seemed, making my skin crawl. Then the TV snapped back to static. The image was gone. A new wave of tap-tap-tap erupted behind us, at my bedroom window. Both of us whirled, terror surging. The window, half covered by a curtain, revealed nothing but darkness outside. We saw no silhouette. Yet the tapping persisted. Kyle lost his nerve, rushing to flick off the TV. I didn't stop him. The screen died, leaving the room in shadow. The tapping at the window stopped just as suddenly. We stood there, breathing hard, hearts pounding. We learned it's in the house. I managed voice faint. Or at least inside the walls. Kyle shook his head in disbelief. That's impossible. We would have heard it. But the memory of that scuttling noise, the pale hand, the reflections, it felt like it could slip through spaces we couldn't even imagine. I motioned for him to follow me out. We rejoined Millie downstairs, hearts still racing. Millie woke from her restless sleep, saw our expressions, and demanded answers. We told her, haltingly, about turning on the TV, glimpsing the hallway image. She was furious and terrified. How could you do that after the alerts said not to? She hissed. You're risking all of us. I tried to reason with her, explaining that we needed intel. but she glared at me, tears in her eyes. Maybe your obsession with this stuff is clouding your judgment. Ever think about that? A pang of guilt and anger twisted inside me. I'm trying to protect us, I snapped back. She shook her head. You're playing with forces you don't understand. My God, they specifically warned us, turn off the TVs. You turned one on anyway. Kyle stepped between us, arms raised. Stop it, he said, voice trembling. We're all on edge. We stood there in stony silence, tension thrumming. Finally, Millie retreated to the corner of the couch, hugging her knees, ignoring me. I felt a gnawing sense of shame. Maybe I was letting my curiosity endanger everyone. But something told me we couldn't just hide forever. Hours ticked by. The storm's intensity waxed and waned, but the power stayed out. I paced the living room, my mind a tangle of fear and possible strategies. My phone buzzed, startling me. Another text from the unknown emergency service. They are using TV reflections as entry points. Do not engage. Continued visual contact may result in possession. The word possession sent a chill through me. I recalled the look in that creature's dark eye sockets on the screen. Was it trying to latch onto me? A loud cry snapped me out of my thoughts. Millie's voice. She was pressed to the window, eyes wild. Someone's out there in the street. I rushed over. Through the gap in the curtain, I saw a figure stumbling along the sidewalk, soaked and disoriented. Even from here, I recognized Mr. Henderson, our neighbor from 3 houses down. He looked half-crazed. He was shouting something, but the glass muffled his words. He tripped, fell to his knees in a puddle. Then I saw movement behind him, a tall, pale silhouette stepping out from behind a parked car. My heart seized. Mr. Henderson turned, saw it, and tried to scramble away. The figure seized him with impossibly long arms. He screamed, an echo of pure terror that we heard even through the window. Then the lightning flashed, and in that brief strobe of light, the creature's face hovered inches from his. When the darkness fell again, Mr. Henderson was gone, the street empty. I clapped a hand over my mouth. Millie sank onto the floor, tears brimming. What did they do to him? She whispered. I had no answer. We stayed there, trembling in the hush, the reality of death sinking in. A grim sense of inevitability settled over us. They were out there, picking off anyone who wandered outside. We were cornered in our own home, forced to endure the horror of each passing minute. Kyle eventually woke, found out about Mr. Henderson. He went quiet, eyes dark. None of us could muster false optimism anymore. Around 6:00 a.m., the sky began to lighten, the storm receding to a steady drizzle. We dared to hope that daylight might diminish their power. But as dawn broke, a cold, clammy mist enveloped our neighborhood, swirling like a living thing. Our phones displayed multiple new emergency messages. Stay inside until further notice. Reflections remain hazardous. If cornered, do not make eye contact. At one point, Millie, frustrated and desperate, asked, should we just drive out of here? Maybe we can outrun them. I looked out the window. The streets were wet and draped in fog. We saw what happened to Mr. Henderson. What if the car stalls? We're safer here for now. She bit her lip, not satisfied. But she had no counter-argument. We gathered what food we could, nibbling on crackers, trying to keep our strength. Tension still simmered between me and Millie over my earlier stunt with the TV. Kyle was quiet, staring at nothing. Then his phone vibrated again. He checked it, grimaced. Another text from Dad. My stomach twisted. "Please ignore it this time." He read it anyway, voice shaky. It says, "Kyle, I'm in the backyard. I'm hurt, please help." Millie and I exchanged glances, hearts racing. We knew it was a trap. But Kyle's eyes flashed with a tortured conflict. What if it's real this time? "We can't leave him out there. It's not real," Millie said firmly. "How many times do we have to see them mimic people?" Kyle shook his head, frustration boiling over. "I can't just—" Suddenly, the back door, leading from the kitchen to the yard, rattled. 3 knocks, then silence. "That's him," Kyle whispered, tears in his eyes. I grabbed his arm. "No, that's them." He yanked free, turning on me. "You're so sure about everything. You're the one who turned on the TV, against all warnings. Maybe you're the one risking us. Maybe Dad really is out there." His words stung as Millie tried to calm him, but he shoved past us, sprinting into the kitchen. "Kyle," we shouted, giving chase. He wrestled with the back door lock, ignoring our pleas. In a surge of desperation, I tackled him, but he shoved me off, fueled by fear and hope. Millie grabbed his arm, tears streaming down her face. "Please, you have to stop," she cried. But Kyle wrenched the lock open. The door flew outward, revealing the gray backyard, the fence line hidden by mist. "Kyle, don't do it," I yelled. For a moment, he stood in the threshold, scanning the yard for any sign of Dad. Then a shape materialized at the fence, stepping out of the swirling fog. It was tall, with limbs that seemed too long, the face half concealed by the haze. Kyle's hope shattered. I saw it on his face as he realized his mistake. He tried to slam the door shut, but the creature moved with impossible speed, lunging forward. A single, pale hand thrust between the door and the frame, the fingers splaying. Kyle cried out, pushing against the door with all his strength. Millie rushed over to help. I scrambled up, adding my weight. The hand was cold as death, the nails scraping the wood. Slowly, we forced the door inch by inch. But that monstrous strength on the other side resisted. Then, with a final surge, we managed to slam it shut, slicing off the creature's hand. The severed limb fell to the kitchen floor, dissolving almost instantly into a puddle of foul-smelling fluid. We bolted the door, adrenaline hammering in our veins. Kyle staggered back, trembling violently. "God, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Millie sobbed, burying her face in her hands. My own heart hammered, tears stinging my eyes. Kyle's betrayal had nearly cost us everything, but I couldn't blame him fully. Fear and the creature's manipulation had done this. We retreated to the living room again, reeling from what just happened. The air was thick with guilt and terror. None of us spoke for a long time. Eventually, the rain lessened, leaving only a faint drizzle. The sky outside turned a lighter gray, hinting at full morning. Usually, dawn's arrival would bring comfort. Instead, it felt like a thin veil. Kyle slumped against the wall, tears glistening on his cheeks. Millie tried to console him. I rummaged through my notes, searching for a last-ditch method to banish or repel these creatures. But everything was contradictory, unverified. Then my phone screen lit with one final emergency alert. If survival is critical, you may need to engage. Use a live TV to study their weakness. Caution: direct eye contact equals extreme danger. I read it aloud, voice hollow. Millie shook her head in disbelief. So now they're telling us to do the opposite. First they said turn off televisions. Now they say we might need to turn one on to fight them. This is madness, Kyle muttered. But I felt a grim clarity. That's exactly what I was planning before, only half-baked. Maybe there's a frequency or something on the TV that can expose them. Millie stared at me, tear tracks on her face. You're not seriously thinking of turning on the TV again. Especially after everything that happened. I am, I said softly. If there's even a slight chance we can force them back, we have to try. Kyle looked at me with a mix of dread and resignation. But how do we do that? I exhaled, flipping through my notes. In some accounts, the creatures feed on fear and reflection. But if we can create a feedback loop, we might hold them at bay. We'd point a camera at the screen, forming an infinite reflection loop, and maybe drive them out. Or at least weaken them. Millie gave a humorless laugh. We don't have a camera and the power is out. A cold pit formed in my stomach. We have that old handheld camcorder in the attic, remember? I used it for ghost hunting. It runs on batteries. The siblings exchanged uncertain looks. Even if that works, Kyle said, the house has no electricity. I patted the portable battery pack I sometimes used for my laptop. I have a small power inverter. Enough to power the TV for a short while, if the battery still has juice. The plan was a patchwork of desperation. But we had no other options. We climbed into the attic, rummaging through boxes by flashlight. I found the old camcorder in a dusty crate, next to my so-called ghost hunting gear, a cheap EMF detector and a voice recorder. The camcorder battery read half-charged. Kyle located the power inverter. I tested it with my phone charger. Miraculously, it worked. Maybe enough to power the CRT for a few minutes. We lugged everything downstairs to the living room, set the TV up near an interior wall, far from windows, and covered all other reflective surfaces with blankets, leaving just the TV screen and the camcorder lens. Millie hovered by the hallway, biting her nails. If something goes wrong, we turn it off immediately, she said, voice trembling. I nodded as Kyle flicked the inverter switch. I pressed the TV's power button. But once again, static. Here goes nothing. I pointed the camcorder at the screen, toggling its live feed, output so it displayed the camera's image on the TV. Immediately, we saw an infinite corridor effect. TV reflecting camcorder reflecting TV. The static wavered, revealing a swirling tunnel of repeated screens. A faint hum filled the air, like white noise. The hair on my arms stood on end. Kyle and Millie crowded behind me, breath shallow. Suddenly, the swirling corridor parted. The reflection changed into a distorted image of our living room from some other angle, like a vantage point near the ceiling. And in that image, we saw a tall, pale figure standing right behind us. We all spun around, hearts in our throats. Nothing was there. But on the TV, the creature stood just inches away from our backs, arms elongated. My adrenaline spiked. I forced myself to keep the camera pointed. "Don't look away," I whispered, though I was terrified. The creature in the TV's reflection tilted its head, faceless eyes locked on us. The loop made its outline shimmer, as if caught in a glitch. A rattling hiss emerged from the TV speakers. Millie gasped as the screen flickered. The figure stepped closer in the reflection, hand reaching out. It was as if we were seeing the future, moments before it physically attacked us. Suddenly, the reflection changed perspective. It zoomed in on the creature's face. The features were nearly blank, the skin chalky, the eye sockets hollow. I felt a sharp pain in my temples. Kyle let out a strangled cry, dropping to one knee. Millie clutched my shoulder, nails digging in. The hiss rose in pitch. The entire living room took on a static-laden charge, as though reality itself was glitching. In a burst of courage, I angled the camcorder so it fed the creature's own face back into the loop. The figure recoiled on screen, flickering violently. A second later, my phone lit up with a new alert that I glimpsed in my peripheral vision. "You're almost there. Just don't make eye contact. You have to stay focused." I had no idea who was sending these. But I pressed on, refusing to look directly at the creature's eyes in the screen. Instead, I locked onto its chest or its arms, adjusting the camcorder so the infinite reflection repeated over its form. The figure convulsed, the screen image distorting. The hiss escalated into a shriek. For a moment, it felt like we were gaining the upper hand. The creature's image stuttered, parts of it vanishing into swirling patterns. Then, from just outside the living room window, we heard a furious pounding. The entire wall shook, as something hammered it from outside, trying to break in. Millie screamed, backing away. Kyle tried to steady her, but I kept the camera trained, sweat pouring down my face. The TV's glow flickered. The battery on the inverter was draining fast, too fast. The pounding outside got so intense that cracks formed in the glass. Through the edges of the curtain, I saw more silhouettes, multiple pale figures converging. We'd stirred the hornet's nest. The living room lamp flickered, then died. The inverter beeped a low-power warning. "No," I whispered, shaking it. The TV's image dimmed. The creature on screen leered closer, as if sensing our failing power. Its mouth opened wide, releasing that static scream. Kyle collapsed to the floor, clutching his ears. Millie pressed against the wall, tears streaming. I made a desperate decision. I set the camera on the floor, still angled at the TV, and lunged for the TV's side controls. If I could adjust the brightness or frequency, maybe I could disrupt it further. As I fiddled, the screen flickered one last time, then blacked out. The inverter beeped, then fell silent. The power was gone. Darkness consumed the living room, except for the pale gray light filtering through the windows. The pounding at the glass intensified. We were out of time. Something in me snapped. A wave of resignation and dread crashed over me. With the TV powerless, the creature was free from interference. I grabbed Kyle by the arm, helping him stand. Millie joined us, eyes darting to the windows. "All we did was anger them," she sobbed. "Now what do we do?" I took a shaky breath. "We make a break for the basement. At least there are no windows. We can barricade ourselves for a while." They nodded as the front window cracked under the relentless pounding, spiderweb lines forming in the glass. We sprinted into the hallway, heading for the basement door. Kyle was half limping, still shaken by the creature's screech. Millie fumbled with the basement lock. Then, a horrific rattling from behind, the living room window shattered. Shards of glass rained onto the floor. A tall silhouette crawled inside, limbs contorted. My heart nearly stopped. Millie got the door open. We rushed down the steps, slammed it behind us. I threw the bolt lock. The basement was pitch black, cold, smelling of old cement. We collapsed at the bottom of the stairs, breathing in ragged gasps. Thumps and scrapes resounded above us, as if multiple intruders were searching the house. Kyle shone his flashlight around, revealing cluttered shelves, a laundry area, Dad's old workbench. No windows and a single overhead bulb that wouldn't light, because the power was out. Millie shook uncontrollably, tears streaming. I held her, feeling equally terrified. Kyle huddled against the wall, gripping a baseball bat he'd found. "I'm sorry," he mumbled again, eyes reflecting the flashlight beam. I tried to reassure him, but my voice caught in my throat. We could hear them upstairs, knocking things over, that static hiss creeping in from the corners. We huddled in silence for what felt like an eternity. The noise upstairs ebbed and flowed. Occasionally, we heard a door slam or a piece of furniture scrape. Once, something heavy crashed, maybe it was the fridge. At this point, my nerves were shot. Millie dozed off, head on my shoulder. Kyle stared at the door. I tried to keep watch, but my eyes grew heavy. At some point, exhaustion won, and I slipped into a restless doze. A soft, dripping sound woke me. At first, I thought it was leftover rain. Then, I realized it was coming from the far corner of the basement. Drip, drip, drip. I flicked on the flashlight, scanning the area. My beam landed on something that made my stomach drop. A small puddle seeping through a crack in the wall. And near it, stuck to the concrete, was a twisted mass of that same black hair. I trembled, stepping closer. The hair glistened, half submerged in water. It formed letters, maybe, or random shapes. My flashlight flickered. Kyle stirred. "What are you doing?" I pointed at the hair. He paled. "How'd that get in here?" "No idea," I whispered. "Maybe they're breaking through the foundation, or there's some infiltration." Millie woke, rubbed her eyes and joined us, horror crossing her face when she saw the hair. Then, we heard an unmistakable tap 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 at the basement door. Our blood ran cold. We backed away from the stairs, hearts hammering. The door rattled and a voice seeped through, eerie in its calmness. "Please let me in. It's so dark down there." My hand tightened on the flashlight. We recognized the voice. It was Dad's once again. Millie shook her head, tears in her eyes. "Go away," she shouted. Tap, tap, tap. "Millie, it's Dad. I need your help." Kyle squeezed his eyes shut, clamping his hands over his ears. I whispered, "Don't listen." "It's not him," the voice persisted. "I'm proud of you kids. Just open the door. Let's be a family again." The doorknob jiggled. Something about that mundane noise made my skin crawl more than any monstrous scream. They were imitating normalcy. Then the static hiss returned, building pressure in my head. I braced for them to smash the door down. But the voice fell silent. The door stilled and the tapping was gone. We waited, uncertain. But there were no new sounds. Did they give up? Or were they waiting for us to make a move? My mind flicked to the defunct TV upstairs, the half-baked reflection loop. A random snippet of my research popped up. If you break the reflection, sometimes you can sever the connection. But we tried that, power died. I swallowed thickly. Maybe we can lure one down here and finish the job. We corner it in the reflection loop somehow. Millie stared at me like I'd lost it. "We have no power." "I have an idea," Kyle said unexpectedly. "The generator Dad used for storms. It's in the shed out back." My heart sank. That meant going outside. We debated for a good 10 minutes, huddled in the damp basement, about whether it was worth the risk. The consensus was grim. If we stayed here, eventually they'd find a way in. If we retrieved the generator, maybe we could power the TV for a final attempt to banish them. So we prepared a plan. We'd slip out through the basement's storm cellar doors, assuming we could unlatch them from the inside, dash to the shed, grab the generator, and slip back in. Armed with flashlights and a single hammer, the best we could find, we unbolted the rusted storm doors. They creaked horribly as we forced them open. Dawn had broken fully now, but the sky was still choked with a thick, colorless mist. Millie insisted on staying behind to watch the basement door from inside. Someone had to guard it. Kyle and I ascended into the yard, hearts thudding. The grass squelched underfoot. The entire backyard looked warped in the fog, silhouettes of the fence barely visible. We crept to the shed, a small wooden structure Dad used to store tools and the old generator. At each step, I expected a tall figure to appear from behind a tree. But the yard was silent. The only sound was dripping from the eaves. We reached the shed. Kyle fumbled with the padlock. "Where's the key?" Panic flared as I realized it. I think Dad kept it in the kitchen drawer, which was upstairs, presumably rummaged by the intruders. "Stand back," Kyle muttered. He hefted the hammer, took a swing. The lock bent but didn't break. Another swing, still no luck. A scraping sound came from behind the shed. We froze. I looked around, shining my flashlight. In the whiteness of the mist, I saw a faint outline of something tall. "Faster, Kyle," I hissed. He battered the lock until it finally snapped. We tugged open the shed door. Inside it was dark, tools hung on racks. The generator sat near the back, a squat, heavy machine. We each grabbed a handle, hoisting it. It was heavier than I remembered, but adrenaline fueled us. Our plan: carry it back to the storm cellar, keep it in the basement, hook it up. When we emerged from the shed, the tall outline in the mist was gone, and my heart pounded mercilessly. We stumbled across the yard. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though the rain had mostly stopped. The grass parted underfoot. Then we heard a new sound, scrape, scrape, just behind us. We picked up the pace, nearly running. The generator banged against our legs, but we refused to let go. Finally, we reached the storm doors. They stood ajar, leading into darkness. We had no idea what we might find inside, but we had no choice. We clambered down, dragging the generator step by step. Millie's wide-eyed face awaited us. "Hurry," she whispered. "They're still upstairs." We slammed the storm doors, bolting them from the inside. We set the generator near a corner, hooking up an extension cord that ran upstairs. Dad had rigged something similar in the past for blackouts. Our hope was we could power just the TV and the camcorder, nothing else. Millie looked pale as she explained. "I heard them rummaging around the first floor, but they haven't tried the basement door again. Maybe they don't realize we have an exit here, or maybe they were waiting for us to come out." Either way, we had little time. With trembling hands, Kyle fueled the generator from a spare can of gasoline. Then he yanked the cord. The engine sputtered to life, chugging loudly. We heard a sudden scuttling noise from above, like they heard it too. Our hearts pounded. I tested the extension cord with my phone charger. It worked. "Okay, let's do this." Millie clutched my arm. "They'll know we're turning it on." "They'll come now. That's the point," I said grimly. "We lure them in, and we do the reflection loop. Maybe we can drive them away for good." She nodded, fear shining in her eyes. Carrying the extension cord up the basement steps felt like walking into a nightmare. Kyle followed behind, brandishing the hammer, while Millie stayed with the generator. I unlocked the basement door an inch, peering into the hallway. The house was unnervingly quiet, the living room dim with the gray light from outside. No sign of them. But the furniture was overturned, couches, tables knocked aside. The front window was shattered, glass strewn across the floor. A trail of wet footprints led deeper into the house. We slipped into the living room, stepping carefully around shards. I found the TV on its side, but it looked intact. The camcorder lay where I'd dropped it, battered but hopefully still functional. We set the TV upright, plugged it into the extension cord. The screen flickered, but the speaker squealed with feedback. I tried not to panic. This was our last chance. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the hallway. A pale shape gliding past, impossibly tall. I forced myself to focus on the cables. "Kyle," I breathed, "be ready." He gripped the hammer tighter, knuckles white. Power thrummed into the TV, and it started showing static. I grabbed the camcorder, flicked it on. The lens feed displayed on the screen. The reflection corridor effect reappeared. Out of the hallway, the tall figure emerged, joining two more behind it. My breath caught. They advanced slowly, spindly limbs scraping the walls. I aimed the camcorder at them, letting the reflection feed loop on the TV. The static crackled. The creatures paused, eye sockets turning toward the screen. Like before, they flickered in and out, glitching. A high-pitched whine filled the air. Kyle stepped closer, positioning himself between me and them. The floor vibrated beneath our feet. One creature lunged, spidery arms outstretched. Kyle swung the hammer, connecting with its torso. The impact felt like hitting a bag of wet sand. The creature hissed, recoiling, limbs flailing. I adjusted the camera, capturing its face in the infinite reflection loop. It convulsed, letting out a piercing shriek. The others screeched, staggering backward as if forced away by the feedback. For a moment, it seemed to work. The creatures spasmed, their forms breaking apart in glitchy fragments. My heart soared. Then the TV image distorted, the screen popping. Sparks flew from the back. The generator must have surged, or the ancient CRT gave out. Either way, the screen died. "No," I cried, hitting the side of the TV. Smoke seeped from the vents. We'd lost the reflection feed. The creatures let out a guttural sound, like a triumphant hiss. With a burst of unnatural speed, they lunged. Kyle and I stumbled back. I tripped over an overturned table, the camcorder skidding away. "Run," Kyle roared. But there was nowhere left to go. They blocked the hallway. The front door was shattered and presumably crawling with more of them. I cast a wild glance at the dead TV, the smoking remains of our plan. The creature loomed over us, towering, faceless. My heart pounded in my ears. In a final act of defiance, I snatched the camcorder from the floor, pointed it at the creature, hoping maybe the lens alone could do something. Kyle hefted his hammer, ready to strike. The creature's hollow eyes seemed to lock on me. My muscles froze, pinned by the sheer horror of that eyeless gaze. Static hissed in my head, drowning out rational thought. Behind it, I saw the silhouettes of others creeping forward, each twisted and gaunt. Lightning flashed outside, illuminating their featureless faces. The humanoid creature raised a hand, fingers elongating. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to shout for Kyle, for Millie, for anyone, but no sound escaped my lips. The creature's hand hovered inches from my face, nails glinting. My vision blurred with tears. Then, in a swirl of white noise, it lunged. The lights flickered on. Just for a second, the overhead fixture in the living room blinked back to life. The entire house buzzed with electricity. My phone in my pocket vibrated violently, spitting out one last alert. Emergency alert. Turn off all televisions. I only had time to register the irony. The TV was already destroyed. The glare from the overhead light revealed the creature's bizarre translucence, edges shimmering. Its mouth opened in a silent scream. The world seemed to slow, the static roar in my ears reaching a crescendo. I felt a pulling sensation, like something tugging at my very core. In that half-second of clarity, I sensed Kyle swinging the hammer from behind me, trying to deflect the creature's blow. A jolt of pain blasted through my mind as the creature's nails raked across my shoulder, cold, searing. And that's when everything went dark. I don't know if I blacked out, or if the house was swallowed by something beyond my understanding. The only thing I recall in that final instant was the echo of my own heartbeat, and Kyle's voice shouting my name. The sensation of falling gripped me, falling into an endless static void. Then there was nothing. That's the end of today's story. If you enjoyed the video, subscribing to my channel would help me out more than you can imagine. I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.